3 syllables, Taplines listener. King of beers. Super Bowl. Commercial. I guess that's 9, actually. This will make sense in a second, I promise. In 1994, the mighty pre-InBev Anheuser-Busch made a somewhat shocking decision to do a comedic ad for its flagship brand. A humor spot, if you will. This was a big deal. Up until then, Budweiser's ads hewed to the heartland with sincere, wholesome Americana themes and tunes. The Clydesdales, after all, were no joke. But by the mid-90s, the winds of change were whipping through St. Louis. Bud Light, introduced in 1982, was surging on the back of a super successful Spuds MacKenzie campaign, and the powers that be at ABHQ were more amenable to the idea of maybe lightening up the flagship brand's advertising a little bit. So when the firm's longtime hometown ad agency came up with an idea for Bud in 1994 that called for animatronic frogs, August Busch III didn't laugh them out of his office. He gave them the green light. Thus began the production process for one of Adweek's most iconic alcohol ads of all time, built on the strength of just 3 simple syllables. You know the ones. Budweiser. Okay, I'm not very good at it, but today on Taplines we have someone who is, Tom Woodard. These days, he's the creative director of Nashville's On the Avenue, a training studio space for creative Tennesseans with disabilities. But in 1994, he was writing jingles just outside of town when he got a call from some advertising colleagues. Could he put together a voiceover demo of what it'd sound like if 3 bullfrogs croaked out the name of the world's most famous beer brand? Tom could, and he did, croaking his way into the annals of American advertising history as the literal voice of Bud in the King of Beer's instant classic 1995 Super Bowl ad. In the episode you're about to hear, we're going to talk about that, how it came to be, what happened after it hit the air, and so much more. It's the voice of Bud, Tom Woodard. It's Budweiser, of course. It's behind the scenes with the most famous frogs in the beer business. And it's all right here, right now, on Vine Pair's Taplines. Prepare your ears, Taplines listeners. We have a famous voice joining us here in Taplines Virtual HQ. It's Tom Woodard, better known as the voice of Bud. Tom, welcome to the show.
Dave, thanks a lot for having me. For those that are still alive when the spot was done, I'm glad we're having this conversation. A lot of fun.
Tom, we're so glad to have you. Where are you joining us from today?
Yeah, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, with my wife and son and daughters and grandkids, and so hail as a native Nashvilleian.
Welcome, and I'm sure Nashvilleians far and wide will be thrilled to have you here on the show today, as are students, scholars, and enthusiasts of the American beer industry. As I mentioned, you're the voice of Bud, and for those who don't know quite what I'm talking about, the voice of Bud, I mean, Bud's had a million commercials. No, I mean the guy who said Bud in one of the most famous Budweiser commercials that has ever aired, 1995's Budweiser Frogs Super Bowl spot. We're going to get into that spot and your involvement in it and its impact over the course of this episode. I'm thrilled. I cannot wait. I'm brimming with excitement. But Tom, before we do that, you're the creative director and the founder of On the Avenue there in Nashville. Your work does not just span the beer industry these days. What is it that you're doing these days? Get a little plug in here for the work you're doing these days.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for letting me do that.
Gotta do it.
We built a little place called On the Avenue that gives people with disability, all kinds of disabilities, the opportunity to use creativity to build community and confidence. That's really the idea there. If you're interested in more about it, it's at ontheavenue.net, or if you're interested in supporting us, great plug here, go to ontheavenuefoundation.org. And it's really a cool situation we've got going in a 6,000 square foot studio here in Nashville.
Hell yeah. So go check that out, folks. If you're interested in learning more on what Tom is up to these days. Now, Tom, it's time, as we do with all our guests here on Taplines, to fire up the Taplines time machine. We are going to go back to the mid-'90s. We'll set the date to, I guess let's go to the years 1994, right before, sort of this Budweiser Frogs ad hits the airwaves in early 1995. Tom, you get the call. Budweiser Frogs isn't yet a thing, but it's starting to gestate, right? The wheels are turning. And I think it would be useful for those folks outside of the beer industry, outside of the ad space, to understand how this type of campaign comes to be. When do you first get involved in what would become this iconic ad?
Yeah, it's weird. I was in the jingle business, so we wrote music and did audio for radio and TV commercials all over the country, and had done a lot of work with Budweiser. And so I would say late 94, it's been a long time, but late 94, September, we got a call from Michael Smith and Dave Swain. They worked at DMB&B, great ad agency, Darcy Macy, Spinton and Bowles up in St. Louis, and did a lot of Budweiser work. And so we had already done a lot of music for them. And the story sort of goes that Michael had a frog, pet frog named Bud as a kid. And they were a writer and creative director team, a writer and graphic design guys team at Darcy. And they had an all call for the first humor spot to ever be done for the main brand of Budweiser. That's kind of unique. And so we get called in, in early stages. And the creative team calls us and says, hey, can you create a little audio track that has frogs saying the words Bud, Wise, and Earth. And so I remember doing the original demo. I was the voice of all three, just as a demo, laid some crickets down. I lived on a farm at the time here in Tennessee, which was kind of cool. Had a little pond. I knew what it was supposed to sound like. So I was like, sure, I can do that. And so we ended up producing this little audio track, one of the first digital uses of the Mitsubishi X80 that we used back in the day, getting a little audiophile guys that like beer there. So it was an early digital recording, and Swain sent us a script. I remember this vividly, and it had all the syllables on it. And it was like, this is crazy. And so
that's short script.
Yeah, it's a real short script. But we carried it around. It's got, it's very, the timing of it was very important. So anyway, and of course it ends up with Budweiser, and they take that and 3 pencil drawings that Michael had done of frogs, and they go into the agency. Go into the brewery and meet with Mr. Bush, young Mr. Bush at the time, and it's the first comedy spot that ends up being the very first comedy spot ever run for main brand Budweiser.
Let's talk about the idea of the first comedy spot, because I think that's significant. Certainly in hindsight, this is significant, right? But let's unpack what that meant at the time for you as an ad creative or as someone who's working in the field. You had done other jingles for other brands. Had you ever worked on the Budweiser brand before, or this was the first time?
No, we had done a lot of music. I did a bunch of just tracks and stuff for them, for Michael and Dave, same creative team, just for different spots. The bottle turning and some of the hero things.
Sure.
Main brand Budweiser at the time was America's beer. It was very serious. It was what a father handed down to his son. It was all American. It was Clydesdales and proud and big and American flags and all the stuff, right? It was America's beer, kind of like the Cowboys.
Sure, yeah, America's team, sure. What does the audio look like for it before this commercial? I mean, you mentioned hero. I'm imagining swelling music. I'm imagining, big sort of Americana, audio themes. You can tell that I'm not an audio engineer. Help me out here. Give me the vocabulary.
No, it was very heartfelt and big heartland stuff, and there was a lot of orchestral music being done at that time. You had Rocky, and you had the Rocky theme, and you had all this kind of stuff that was really bombastic and big and large, and heartland of America. That was the idea.
Yeah.
It was really about just putting your hand over your heart, having a cold beer, and celebrating being an American. That's really what it was about. So there was a lot of humor in main brand items like Budweiser or main brand beverages.
Other brands would dabble in humor, whether this was at a CPG company just in general or at Anheuser-Busch in particular, you kind of do that with other parts of the portfolio, right? Maybe your younger brands or your spin-off brands that are only supposed to target a specific demographic, but to map comedy, to map humor onto the flagship, onto the standard bearer, that's a pretty big deviation in any company, and it's especially a big deviation in Anheuser-Busch, where Budweiser, the king of beers at this time, we're talking about the mid-90s, it was already starting, at least in the marketplace, to lose ground to Bud Light and to the other light beers. But in terms of its reputation, in terms of its gravitas, it was still just a really significant brand. So this had to be, I mean, gosh, I got to imagine it's kind of daunting for you to be like, all right, the first comedy spot here, man, like it's got to be really definitively Budweiser and definitively good, right? It can't just be a tossed off spot.
Yeah, I want to make sure everybody understands that the agency would have dealt with all of that research and all of that with the brand. I was with a production company down in Nashville, and so we got involved in a real peripheral way to begin with. And then, of course, I couldn't drink anything but Budweiser products and all that. But you're exactly right. I mean, Bud Light had a different agency. Bud Light was being handled by DDB Needham in Chicago.
Yep. And
so at that time, and a lot now, a lot of agencies will simply take one brand of a company, someone else, because it's really about audience and how they drive message to audience more than it is how they sell products. So if you think of that, it's really the agencies hired for their ability to go reach audience.
Yeah.
And we worked for those agencies, and it was a lot of fun that way. But Darcy had being right there in St. Louis, they've been the agency of record with Budweiser since its inception. Mm-hmm. They were the very first agency, and there were some rumblings, I think, at that time, if I remember correctly, of things not going well, and the desire of Bud Light for exactly what you're talking about, Dave, had taken off with comedy and had a whole new audience, and sales were going through the roof. And I think the brand started looking to move out of their backyard, which was just taboo, man. You wouldn't even think about leaving St. Louis at the time. All beer was done there. You know,
that was the center of the universe. Yeah, between them and Milwaukee, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's if you tap into where that's actually the beer was being created, so the agencies were there naturally. Yep. And DDB Needham was in Chicago, and so they were doing Bud Light, and I still contend Chicago is the greatest ad community in the country, simply because it's a part of the American culture, right in the middle. It's big city, it's big shoulders, it's heartland, it's all of that, and some of the best creative done when creative really, really mattered in advertising, in my opinion.
Was coming out of Chicago.
Came out of Chicago.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So
I think that fueled a little bit. Little bit to drive some movement in the main brand, and I think allowed that first comedy spot to come out.
Yeah, right.
Dave and Michael were funny. They were just funny guys.
Yeah,
and kind of quirky and awesome ad guys. And so their spot rose to the top at Darcy. It got pitched. I think we produced late fall of '94, and the thing aired in a couple of off markets and then premiered on the Super Bowl.
Wow.
In '95.
And so you were, like I said at the beginning here, you were on the demo, you did all three frogs. Eventually you got the top spot as the Bud guy. How many times in 1995, Tom, after the commercial aired, did you walk into a bar and someone was like, do the Bud voice, do Bud?
Well, it really happened after that, because right when it was going on, nobody knew who it was. But yeah, it was amazing, dude. I had some crazy places people wanted me to say the word Bud. I was a deacon at my church and serving communion, and this was about 3 weeks after the Super Bowl, and this lady looked up at me when I handed her the tray of the juice, and she goes, Bud. And I it's like, oh my goodness, how sacrilege can I be? I thought I was going to get struck down right there. But yeah, it was crazy, man. It was crazy. I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but it was nuts being the voice of Bud. It still is. I'm sitting on a podcast in 2023 talking to you.
Sure. And
I feel like it was a kind of a cool card God allowed to happen in my life that I put in my back pocket. I don't have a shirt that says I'm Bud or anything, but it's been a great calling card. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, man, we got toured around pretty good. I've worn a few frog costumes at Halloween, and Done a few things against the Miller girls at the time, and might have been in a few competitions there. So yeah, it was great. Got to meet August Busch, which was really cool, and he took me around the office.
3 Sticks?
The third.
Yeah.
And he toght me around the office like I was his pet dog or something.
His pet frog.
Yeah, it's like, hey, say it.
Right.
So it was great, and it kind of launched us as a jingle company into a place. My voiceover reel says it took this guy 1 syllable to break in the business, and actually, it was my Taft-Hartley, Dave, which was really cool from the voiceover side of things. I was not a member of the union, and you get a first Taft-Hartley to not have to join the union to get paid union dues and all that. And so it was my Taft-Hartley, and the lady at the talent pay place said it was the best Taft-Hartley in the country. They played that. They played those spot everywhere.
So
it was great.
So they call it a Taft-Hartley because you weren't in the union, but then you were able to get into the union because of that job?
No,
I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, Taft-Hartley, it was just the 2 men that put the Congress through.
I know what
the bill through Congress.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, they say that you can't force you to join the union to get paid for the first one. And then I did a spot with Reba McEntire for Fritos after that, and joined the union for that one.
Got it.
Did a bunch of other voice work for a long time.
So the Taft-Hartley is like, as a voice actor, like your freebie, basically. Freebie. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a freebie, like the lady said. Yeah.
Freebie.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the reception to the ad. I mean, the ad comes into creation sort of late '94. It's testing in a few small markets, and then they run it. According to William Noodlestater, they run it 1A, who wrote Bitter Brew, by the way, which is one of the histories of Anheuser-Busch as a company. The commercial runs in the top slot in the first commercial in game, the first commercial break, and you remember people sort of loving it. It sounds like, I mean, someone at your church says it to you over the Eucharist, over the communion, so to speak. But it also received just a tremendous amount of critical reception. I mean, of praise. I mean, people in the highest reaches of the ad world loved it. I'm looking at just some stats here. Ad Age reported that the frog, I'm quoting here now from Bitter Brew, quote, Advertising Age reported that the frogs had tripled the awareness of Budweiser among the target group of 21 to 33-year-olds, close quote. Another quote here, the real winning team that day may have been the Budweiser Frogs, who outscored even the legendary Spuds MacKenzie in USA Today's weekly Ad Track poll. Ad Track rated the Frogs number 1 for 3 months running, with more than 50% of poll respondents saying they recalled the commercial and, quote, liked it a lot, close quote. So, I mean, people are loving this thing as it's coming out. I mentioned Spuds MacKenzie. We're going to talk about that iconic dog because I think that's a really interesting sort of foil here. Spuds MacKenzie, of course, the Bud Light canine, the party animal is what they call them. But people are loving this ad. It's reinvigorating, I think, Budweiser to some extent as a brand. What does this do out in the marketplace? You're obviously you work as a jingle guy at this point, and you're in the ad space, but you're also a consumer. You're also seeing sort of how these things are playing out. Take us back, recall for us, if you will, what this does for the Budweiser brand from your perspective as a consumer.
Yeah, I think it lightened it up a little bit. I think it made it available to a whole new generation of Americans that didn't have to feel proud and old-fashioned in Heartland. And I think it brought it to the cities and, again, added a bit of a smile to it. I think the coolest part about the ad itself that created something in there, it was just simple. It was simply the name of the product.
Yeah.
So from a creative standpoint, I think it was brilliant on the behalf of Dave and Michael and the crew at Darcy. And then and the campaign continued at Needham, and it just got wackier. If you remember, they jumped on a boat and boat rides, and you got tongues stuck to the back of delivery trucks. And
there were the lizards too, right? Louis the Lizard.
The lizards kept us alive for 4 years and tried to kill us that whole time. So, yeah. And that was created by Goodby Silverstein. So the lizards, that's a crazy story. So
that was a whole other agency?
Yeah, third agency involved.
Wow.
And So, and that's a great story. I'm not going to name names, but I'll name the agencies. DDB Needham so Darcy did the first spot.
Yep.
Moves to Chicago, last spot that Darcy ever did for Budweiser. And Michael and Dave went on and continued to do some great things. I think Dave has an agency up there. Michael owns a restaurant or something, but I'm not sure exactly where they are these days. But in St. Louis, I know. And but the spots moved to Chicago, where Bud Light was, and guys like Gore Verbinski, who did Pirates of all the Pirates movies,
would go on to direct the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Yeah,
he was directing the TV spots.
Wow.
Stan Winston did the very first animatronics of the original Frogs, and he had just finished Congo and Jurassic Park. These were huge people in Hollywood that the ad agencies kind of brought in with the dollars from AB. We worked on Warner Brothers set out there, and I mean, it was amazing. But when Needham got it in Chicago, they did about 6 spots. And to be blunt, this is the way ad guys think. They were like, I got a Bud Frog spot on my reel. I don't need another one. And they sort of felt that way a little bit. And so brand then gets a little, itchy, and they had a relationship through Michelob, I believe, or one of the other brands out at Goodby Silverstein out in San Francisco. So they asked them to take a shot at what they would do, and they created the Combatant Lizards that continued the campaign for another 4 years of the battle between the Frogs and the Lizards, and kept us in the Super Bowl. And as everybody knows, there was a big war between them, and Louis was coming after us. And I've always wanted to, Dave, I think it'd be great if you could make this happen. I would love to get all the Frogs, the 3 voices of the Frogs, and a couple of voices of the Lizards, and let's bring them all together and let's have a little dinner and put it on your podcast.
Well,
I think that'd be fun.
Let me ask you a question, Tom. Who were the other 2 Frogs? Wise and Who were the other 2 syllables? Do you remember? 2
of my good friends. They're good friends. We worked together back in the day at the Jingle Company, and the voice of Wise is a great guy named Ronnie Brooks. He lives here in Nashville, and he is he's awesome. His brother wrote Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer. His uncle was Foster Brooks, the old guy that used to fake being a drunk on the Dean Martin show. Sure. And Ronnie's a card man. He played a little open house for us the other night. I saw him. He's doing great, and he's awesome. And Brian Steckler is the voice of and he may be the luckiest dude I know. He was an intern for us at the production company, and the first 3 spots he got on, first one was his Taft-Hartley for Fruit Loops. He did a Ford truck spot, and then became the voice of
My God, the Midas touch. My goodness.
Yeah, he was amazing. He and his wife sort of came from California, took Nashville by storm, and then he went back, and now he's a film score guy out in L.A. and does great work, and they built a beautiful family. And just 2 great guys, Brian Steckler, and Ronnie Brooks, Wise.
That's funny, man. Man, Ronnie Brooks also, what a pedigree from humor, music, and show business. My goodness. Comes from greatness.
And Ronnie was a guitar player. Yeah, wow. Ronnie was a guitar player, still is, and a great guitar player, and played rock bands and all that. And he was a part of our jingle group, and we were just guys working at the agency.
Yeah.
And we just said, hey, come say Wise like an old Jewish guy from the Bronx. And Wise. And so he did, and I said, Steckler, say and then the little one where he gets it, and so they put all that together, or we put all that together and mixed it with a bed of crickets that sounded like my paw, and then we sent it back, and there you go.
Now, wait a second. Did the audio for the ad actually come from your pond in Tennessee? Were you just out there with like a boom mic, like getting the crickets? Do you remember?
We did some of that. We did do some of that. It became way overproduced. You could have done it, taken a sound design track or something out of there, but yeah, it was really funny. And the funniest part is we gave them the demo. It's a great little story if you've got a second.
Sure.
We did the demo, sent it up. Michael did the 3 pencil drawings. August bought the campaign, and I get a call from Chan Hatcher, who is the producer at Darcy in St. Louis, and he goes, "Hey, thank you for the demo. We're going to go to L.A. and produce the voices." And of course, you didn't know what it was going to be, but you were like, "No, you're not.
Yeah,
we want to be the voices."
Wait a second.
And he's like, well, we've got to go to Los Angeles to produce the voices. And so I was kind of a little bit, slighted, if you will.
Yeah, that doesn't feel good.
From Nashville. Yeah. Didn't feel good. So I get in my car and I go out and I talk to Chan, and he goes, "I tell you what, I'll let you produce it. You get to produce it, but we're going to go to L.A." And so this is a cool backstory. He sent a DAT tape, if you remember what digital audio tape, this little bitty digital audio tape of 30 different auditions for each syllable. So I had to listen through Bud. I had to go listen through that and wise 30 times by 30 different people and pick. He let me pick the voices, and so he did. And you'll recognize some of these guys. I picked a guy for was a guy named God, I'm gonna forget his name real quick right here. Roger Bumpus.
Okay,
and he was a voice actor in LA and did a lot of stuff. And then the guy I remember the most is I picked this guy named Brad Garrett, and Brad, who was just a stand-up comedian up and down LA, a budding actor at the time in '94, and Brad went on to be in a bunch of television shows. Big, tall comedian actor. He's awesome. So I went out and produced those guys at Soundwave Studio in '94. Had a big time, as agencies would tend to do when they go to LA, and had a lot of fun. And at the very end of the session, after doing all this stuff with these real voice actors, I said, leave the demo up front to the engineer. Leave the demo up front. And he goes, okay. So I go have fun with the agency guys. We fly back to Nashville. 3 days later, I get a thing. Hey, we didn't capture the magic in LA. Can we use the demo? So that's how we became the actual voices. And so I think Brad Garrett, I've never met Brad, but I would love to meet Brad someday. He might hit me in the mouth or something. I don't know. But he was really fun to work with. He was really a great guy. I remember in the session, and of course, a very talented man. So he's done okay. That's
too funny, man. So a little bit of tradecraft there to make sure that you're
tradecraft.
Yeah.
Well, leave your demo on the front.
That's
leave your
right.
demo up front. Never know.
Let that be a lesson to you, Taplines listeners. For anyone who's going out for any voice work, make sure that your tape is up top. Of course, I guess now it's mostly files. There aren't really actually any DAT tapes.
It's all file streaming. All that. Yeah. That's right. Not many DAT tapes. I've still got the original DAT though.
Do you really?
Oh yeah, I got a box of stuff for you. We got a box of all kinds of stuff for you.
Yeah, wow.
I got show and tell later.
Yes, please. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I'm just so fascinated by the DAT tapes and that little move you did to make sure that you got listened to and that you got cast as the bug.
Yeah. Well, while you're thinking of it, and then after the spot ran, we heard it moved to Needham, so I got on a plane and flew to Needham and met all the guys that were producing up there, and they let us stay the voices of the Frogs. So we ended up continuing to produce, and they produced all the audio from that point up at places called Cutters and different cool rooms up in Chicago. Mm-hmm. But again, it was just a real blessing, man. Real crazy blessing to be a part of all that.
How did you? I didn't even ask this at first. Why you just happen to be buddies with the Darcy guys? Like why did you get the call?
Michael had been a creative director at a place. He and I helped create a place called Beach TV. It's a television network down on the coast of places. He had done in Panama City Beach. We started that. And then he moved and became creative director up there. I ended up at a jingle house in Nashville writing and producing and selling music. And like I said, we had done a bunch of stuff for them music-wise.
Yeah.
Out of the blue, he calls, like we were being a pirate in the studio when I got the call or something. And he goes, hey, man, can you make a frog say Budweiser? And I'm like, sure, dude, why not? We can do anything. I was selling it. And then I went home that night, heard the crickets, and it just, all the stuff starts to happen. And then they
too funny, man.
Working with Dave and Michael was magical. Again, and then ended up meeting Stan Winston and Gore Verbinski and all kinds of crazy people.
Just these tight people who would go on, Stan Winston was already in his prime. Yeah. I think he sadly passed. Stan Winston, I think, passed away a couple years ago. But Gore, that's right. Yeah, Gore Verbinski would go on to do Pirates of the Caribbean. Just like enormous amount of talent that is flowing through creative, ad creative at that time. And I suppose a little bit these days, although my understanding of the ad business is that it's changed quite dramatically since 1995. But I don't want to dwell too much on the agency thing because this is a little bit of like intrigue and cloak and dagger, but I do think it's worth at least laying out for our Taplines listeners about sort of the significance of the move from Darcy to DDB Needham up in Chicago, where, as you said earlier, Chicago is a epicenter, if not the epicenter of ad creative at that time. That's sort of the best stuff is tending to come out of there. But you also mentioned that having local agencies, that are servicing big American firms in, your St. Louis's or your, whatever, Houston, Texas, or whatever. There were agencies that would spring up to do all of the work for these firms as they continue to get bigger and bigger. At AB, it was for basically its entire modern existence, is my understanding. Darcy had the Budweiser account. It was a big firm there in St. Louis. There's sort of competing tales about why Darcy winds up losing the Budweiser account. The one in Bitter Brew, Nodal Stater reports that someone at Darcy, after it got acquired by a larger New York agency, someone made the faux pas of signing a deal to do ad buying for Miller Brewing Company. So Darcy was going to have both the Budweiser brand, which at that point is reportedly around $125 million a year account, but was also going to be doing ad buying for its biggest competitor, its mortal enemy, the Miller Brewing Company. And supposedly, again, according to Nodal Stater's Bitter Brew, this infuriated August Busch III, who, as listeners you'll know from previous episodes with historian Maureen Ogle, author of Bitter Brew, and other guests that we've spoken to, August Busch III, probably one of the more successful executives of his generation, a titan of American industry when that was still, a term that was thrown around without irony. I think he was also known to be quite a forceful and decisive man, and felt double crossed. And again, in Nodal Stater's account, decides that this is time to make a break with Darcy. Does that, broadly speaking, resonate with you or ring true to you? Does that sound like how it went down to your knowledge? Do you remember any of that at the time?
Yeah, I remember a little bit of it. Again, I was on the outside looking in a bit. They were all buddies of mine that I knew. And so I've heard different sides of the story. I've heard that account for sure. I've also heard that account was just the straw, that broke the camel's back. As far as they were already headed out the door, that was just a good last excuse to make it legitimate.
Yeah.
Darcy was the main flag, and then there were a ton of small agencies that did, Bud Ice and all the off brands and all the little
Bush,
one-off experimental brands, Bush, all that different stuff. And then Dave, as you know, then there's the infrastructure of production. There were the voiceover rooms and the edit suites and all that were in St. Louis. And it was really traumatic. When it happened, it was a really traumatic. A lot of guys lost their jobs. A lot.
Totally. Right. I mean, that's the huge account. Yeah.
Huge account. And the peripheral money that was spent in the marketplace. A lot of firms closed. A lot of firms split up. Partnerships broke up. It's amazing the widespread effect it probably had on I can't tell you where everybody is these days, but the widespread effect it had on the ad community that a brand can have like that on a city. And there were parts of St. Louis that got bad because of it. I mean, there were some warehousing districts so it's amazing the impact it can have. So whether it was the Miller buy, and I've heard that to be true, or it was some other things brewing before that, I don't know.
Fair enough.
I think it could be a little of both.
Yeah. Let's switch gears for a second. I mentioned a certain canine, a certain pup, a little bit earlier in our conversation. Right. Spuds MacKenzie hits the airwaves in, I want to say 1987 or so. So it's about 8 years upstream of or preceding the Budweiser Frogs. And Spuds MacKenzie listeners, you have heard us talk about this ruffian, this party animal, as they called him, on previous episodes. For those that are not familiar, it's a bull terrier who is Bud Light's mascot. Basically, they come up with this idea to have the original party, or the ultimate party animal, I think was his tagline. They dress him up in Hawaiian shirts. They send him down to spring break. He's surrounded by a bevy of bikini clad women. He is a enormous runaway hit for Bud Light. And Bud Light as a brand at that point is only, in 87, is only 5 years old, because it hits shelves as Budweiser Light in 1982 before being truncated to Bud Light in 1984. When you were, producing the audio for the Budweiser Frogs ad, this had to be, Spuds MacKenzie had to be at least, if not on your mind, I mean, it was in the ether at that point, right? Like, this was a big successful thing that another brand had done. It wasn't jingle oriented. It wasn't, but it was comedy. And were you thinking at all about Spuds MacKenzie when you were thinking about doing this animal comedy spot for Budweiser? Was that crossing your mind at all? Man, they like this. Maybe they'll like it if we do something like that.
I've only heard the stories of how Michael and Dave kind of came up with it. I don't know if there's always competition inside agencies. Like, what happens is a group of creatives will get together and they pair off, and writer and art director kind of teams.
Yeah.
And then they come up with campaigns, right? And so I don't think they were probably thinking about Spuds. I really think it's something everybody's tried to say, hey, it was designed to attract children. It was designed to do this. It was designed. Yeah. I really don't think it was any of that. I think Michael had a pet frog named Bud, and I think they were sitting in their office one day and said, I think it'd be a cool way to just say the brand.
Yeah.
And it really was the interesting piece of that. And that's why I say I don't think so. May have been. Dave may be on here tomorrow and go, oh yeah, we had a picture of Spuds up there and we're trying to go after it. But I think that was done by Needham up in Chicago. So they were they had done Chester Cheetah, and they had done some cool characterizations up there, and unbelievable agency. So was Darcy, but Needham was really, really, really on fire at the time, and I made some really good friends in Chicago. I lived up there about 7 years. About that time, I went up there and started producing. We bought a condominium, built a studio, did a bunch of stuff right up there. So got to know the Needham guys really well, and they're really talented guys. And so I would say didn't exactly go after Spuds, but Spuds was definitely the lead duck, the kind of lead dog that opened up animals and some different things to advertising. The funny part is the Bud campaign, the frog campaign was going to be, we produced a Jeff Beck spot. We produced a New York City traffic spot, and all of them in the noise, you heard Budweiser, right, Budweiser. Right. So it was simply going to be the name that you hear in all these natural different places. And so it was literally like horns honking, going, Budweiser. And Times Square was going to have Budweiser. And then we had a Jeff Beck thing where he had this big Bud canister of heliumed stuff. And it was at a Jeff Beck concert. He was on the stage playing this, and we had a Jeff Beck track playing. And you come around, and this was after the frogs had kind of gotten established, and it was the frogs sucking off the helium going, Budweiser. Right. And so it was all this crazy stuff of where you would hear the word Budweiser. So the frogs really weren't, hey, let's go create an animal campaign to do this. It's just one of those phenomenons. And then back to what you said, when it played the Super Bowl, it just
I took off immediately. Yeah, I mean it was
stupid.
But it worked, man.
It worked, dude. It was crazy.
Tell me a little bit. I mean, you're in the audio profession. That's where you've made your career. We talk a lot, I think, in this moment where TikTok is so powerful, right? And this idea of earworms, this idea of sort of sounds that just get in your head and stay in your head. We mostly associate that with music, with jingles, and that's the business you've been in. Budweiser, just the monosyllabic, Budweiser, like everyone, the three frogs saying it, strikes me as, I mean, it's basically an earworm, right? Like everyone loved saying it in this sort of stilted cadence with the low voice, the gravelly voice. From a technical perspective, Tom, help our listeners understand, or just talk through a little bit why that it is as catchy of an earworm as it turned out to be. I mean, hindsight is 2020, right? You can't engineer for these things, but it's obviously something that worked. Why do you think the audio worked as well as it did?
I think it was just so simple, and it was something that you had heard so many times as a human being before, whether you'd been at a pond once or you lived next to one. I think it was just something that everybody came, oh man, that is really clever, number one. And then it was just something that was, I don't know, it's just simple. I crazily have traveled the country talking about creativity and this spot. And I think it's just literally the first spot I can think of that the natural sound of something that the brand name fit in like that.
Yeah.
And then the frogs were cute, and they started doing funny stuff, driving boats and riding alligators and getting chased by lizards. And I don't know, man. I remember one of the things they did was, as you opened the cooler door at a convenience store in the country, they had a little thing and it would trigger Bud. And so it just one syllable. Again, it's just crazy. But it was the name of the product. We all identified with it at the time. And it was fun. It was really fun. I remember going to a University of Tennessee football game one time, and the entire stand started doing it. And there was one section, Bud, Wise, Wow. I mean, it was insane. You have 100,000 people doing that, and you're like,
and kneeling.
And my mother, rest her soul, my mom used to think I was the frog. I was like, no, I'm just a voice. I'm just a voice, Mom. Anyway, so it just took on a life of its own. It was really, really unique. I've got a thing back here. I don't know if we can do that, but I can see it. But there's a little you see that audio there. But I'll take this over. It's a little editorial, and it says, "Why budget?" Bud. It says Bud, why? Jit. Budget, why? Tax cuts? Why budget? And that was done by Jim Borgman in the in the Cincinnati Explorer, probably back in 1996.
So listeners, for those of you who are not watching on YouTube, and of course all our Taplines episodes are available on VinePair's YouTube channel. I recommend you go check them out. But for those of you who can't make it over there, what Tom just showed us is a political cartoon riffing on the Budweiser frogs. But it looks like about Congress. It looks like they were trying to balance the budget. This was the Clinton era, right, of balancing the budget and whatever. So it filtered into the zeitgeist into more serious ways, right? This became a lens through which to tell stories about whatever, politics or culture or social things were going on at that moment.
Absolutely. It became a part of the culture at the time. There's no question about it. And we ended up on TV shows. I was on the Maury Povich show with the greatest voices in the world. And again, stupid stuff, Dave. Just only in America, right? Yeah. Only in America does something like that take on something of as insignificant and really the overall scheme of God's planet, that only in America could that take off like that in a pop culture way. And Budweiser has done a tremendous job for many years of creating ads and characters and spokes things that capture that culture at the time.
Yeah, and this would later on, and this is, of course, well after the Budweiser fraud, only about a decade or a dozen years or so. In 2006 or so, right before they get acquired by InBev, which happens, the hostile takeover happens in 2008. But in 2006 or so, August Bush IV is being groomed as the heir apparent to take over from Augie Bush III, Three Sticks. He's the next generation. He's got a lot of baggage in his past, but he's being sort of cleaned up and presented as this hotshot new executive who understands the young drinker, right, and can take us into the next generation. One of the things it cracks me up obviously, hindsight being 2020, you knew this was going to be a boondoggle, but Augie Bush IV launches Bud TV, and it's partly in hopes of, or at least the thesis, to the extent that it existed, is this idea that there is this this Bud universe of characters, you know, that people love. The Frogs, the Spuds McKenzie, the What's Up guys, you know, like all of this stuff is content. When we're first starting to, you know, as an industry, the ad world is first starting to think about content, right? As sort of stuff that you can put out there and people are just going to consume. And Bud TV was this attempt by the company to capitalize on its ability. Its sincere ability, its real ability to make important characters in American culture. It wasn't that they weren't able to do that. That Budweiser wasn't able to do that, and Bud Light and all the agencies they worked with, of course. The project failed for a variety of reasons, one of which is that like creating a 30-second ad is a little bit different than programming a 24/7 cable TV channel. But your point is well made, Tom, that like they've always been very good at creating sort of this cast or this roster of characters. Like we have now the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like, but at a time there was the Anheuser-Busch Cinematic Universe, you know?
It's crazy. And who was the guy? Max Headroom and all that, and with Coke. I mean, everybody was trying to do it. I mean, remember all those guys? I mean, it was much more. The Super Bowl was much more entertaining at that time. There's some good ads now. I mean, I watch it every year for the ads, but back then it was a really big deal to be on the Super Bowl.
Let me ask you, Tom. I'm always curious about this. You're an ad guy. You've worked in this field or adjacent to it your whole life, or a lot of your life. It sounds like. That's a common refrain, right? Like, oh man, Super Bowl ads used to be better, you know. And I'm 35, and I say that. I think that that's true. You've had a wider, sort of lens on this. You have more perspective than I do. Was there really
more gray hair, Dave?
Yeah, well, you have more hair in general, so congratulations on that. But was there really was this the golden era? In 95-ish? Like, when did it peak? Was Budweiser Frogs at the tail end of it? Was it in the middle of it? In your perspective, like, when was the biggest moment for the Super Bowl? As an ad,
Super Bowl in particular. Yeah, it was definitely in the 90s. I mean, it was a big deal because people there had been enough really good ads going back to the 1984 and all the, you know, the
famous Macintosh ad. Yeah.
Yeah, all those things that had come around in the 80s. So 80s and 90s were absolutely, in my opinion, were Hollywood's last bastion of real cinematography and big deals and, you know, $1 million TV spot budgets and all that stuff. And which would be $5 million today, $10 million today, easy. Right. And so, I think it was. I think it's more of, I think the consumer changed that though. And I was in the jingle business. I got in about 1984. And stayed in it until about 2001. And it changed when real music took over the jingle business. No longer did you write Heartbeat of America or write a big campaign. Some days were made for Michelob or did somebody say McDonald's or all these different things. Nobody was doing that. They were just taking existing music, doing a licensing fee, buying the equity in that song, putting some simple voiceover on it, or not even doing a voiceover to save the dollars. And then putting price an item, and it was let's buy, let's promote.
Yeah.
And not so much let's spend $100 million and build a cultural piece like Budweiser had just kept doing over and over. I mean, there's no telling $1 billion has been invested in the Clydesdales and promoting the Clydesdales.
Oh, God,
keeping
easy.
it. I mean, it's got to be. I mean, there's no telling what they spend to do that. So I think brands started to see that you could have a music track and a voiceover and you didn't need to build a big campaign, or you could use the existing song. Revolution, you know, that's when the Beatles kind of started turning loose of their catalog, and real musicians saw that we were making a little money over in the jingle business and decided to come jump in, and the jingle business changed a lot, which then changed the ad business, the creative side of it. And then the consumer just went, I'm not going to stay with you that long. Like, there's no reason that a campaign like Heartbeat of America should ever change, ever. And yet the consumer says, I'm not going to stay with you that long. I'm going to go shop elsewhere. Then the agency is charged with, hey, go fix that.
Right.
Well, you can't fix that with an ad sometimes.
Right.
And so
that's a really interesting point. Yeah. Hey, well, I think that's a good segue, or an appropriate segue, to one of the questions I wanted to ask you in our interview here, is Budweiser Frogs, iconic. Again, one of the best ads, considered one of the best ads. Adweek called it, quote, one of the most iconic alcohol campaigns in advertising history. We talked before about how it tops USA Today's ad track. It wins all the, it wins a silver lion, a can, a bunch of Clio's, advertising Oscars, so to speak. But you also have this sense, or I do, looking back at it as someone who covers the business contemporarily, that it is very of its era. And the question, for better and worse, the question I pose to you is there a place for that type of work in today's, in the advertising landscape that you see today for beer and for other consumer packaged goods?
I'll say yeah. I'll say yes, because I'm a big message guy. It really doesn't matter about the medium, in my opinion, as much as the message. Now, I'm also older and really don't care about some of the mediums. So I've kind of, I gave up social media for Lent a couple of years ago and hadn't gone back. But
good for you.
Yeah, man.
Stay off.
A lot less stress. A lot less stress.
It sounds great. Amazing.
But, yeah, do it. I recommend it every spring. To keep redoing it. But what I would say to that is the message, I think, would work. I think if you brought a spot like Budweiser back, and my current wife would absolutely love for the campaign to come back, by the way. Anyway, so
why? Is she a big frog fan?
No, she likes the mailbox money, so she just would like to see the mailbox money come back.
Fair enough.
So I get that. So, but all that said, put aside, I think a campaign like that would work. I think, again, it would be in different medium. You would have it all over social. Will Ferrell does amazing work. And if you go to a newer campaign that he did about 2 Super Bowls ago for Old Milwaukee.
Sure, those spots were terrific. Yep.
I don't know. You remember that where he's running through the field and all that? Yeah,
they're great spots.
Well, think about what he did there. Think about what they did there. They did the same type, cool, fun, different, zany, a little bit of something, but he only bought, I think it's called Platte, Nebraska, North Platte, Nebraska. It's the smallest television market in America. So they ran that spot on that television station, not on the network of the Super Bowl, but they bought the Super Bowl in North Platte. Yep. The local and paid, I don't know what they paid for, a few $1,000 probably.
Mailbox money.
And they ran it. Nothing, right? And then all of a sudden, they put it on social and it gets 10, 20, 30 million views. Sure. And they call it the Super Bowl spot. That is the new medium of how to do that. But the message and the fun and the creativity, I think, still lives as long as we continue to create it, or as long as the consumers desires it. And I think they do. I think there's right on. Still a want I think for that.
I hope that you're right. And I think that I think I buy that for the most part. I think the challenge for me, or the stumbling block for me, is like with the consumer, with the audience being so fractured in their attention span, being so used to consuming content in 2 to 5 to 15 second maybe bits, are the frogs themselves flashy enough? Is there enough going? I mean, because one of the things I love about this spot is the Foley audio, the natural audio, is the setup, is the build, and like it takes really powerful creative to get a viewer who's conditioned to swiping through TikTok, every half a second, to get them to buy into that ad. So I think it's a challenge, but as you say, like good message can still win the day, or at least I would like to live in a world where that continues to be true. So we'll go with that.
Maybe I'm being wishful. Yeah, maybe I'm having wishful thinking, Dave, kind of like you are. I don't know. We'll see. But
that's okay. That's what we do here on Taplines. We're allowed to wish cast here on Taplines. This is my podcast. We can do whatever we want.
Good. I like that. And you make a good point. I think the 90s were a loud decade, very loud decade, a lot of noise going on. And so one of the reasons this thing probably did take off is you would hear a lot of noise, and then all of a sudden you just hear the crickets. Sure. And it was like, did the TV turn off?
A powerful juxtaposition. Yeah.
I think, and so I think if you're playing social, just fast forward to today, in the noise and the quick tick of just consuming stuff. Sure. Sometimes silence is very, very loud, and so I think it could still work in that vein. Again, like you're saying, it's not a 30-second play. It's 2 to 3, 5, 7 second plays. Yeah. But yeah, I think it still works. And I think creativity in advertising is all about getting the audience's attention and making them make a decision. And so, yeah, I don't see why that couldn't work better.
Right on. Tom, I have two more questions for you. You've come with us 51 minutes on my little Taplines timer over there. We only keep you for a few minutes more. You mentioned you're a deacon at your church, and shortly after the ad airs, you meet a woman in the communion line who gives you the bud treatment. Yeah. And then you also mentioned Maury Povich, where you're on as one of the best voice actors or voiceovers of all time or whatever, the most iconic. Are there any other sort of like shining moments for you in the aftermath of being the Bud guy that you were just like, you mentioned that you feel like, it's stupid, it's crazy, whatever. Was there another moment where you were just like, what is going on here, man? This is nuts.
Yeah, a couple really. The day of the spot aired on the Super Bowl, I had a party. I lived on a farm, like I said, out west of Nashville, and we had a party for about 250 people. And we served Eagle brand snacks and Budweiser beers. And we knew the spot was coming. And so it was a lot of fun to watch it with a bunch of good friends. And the phone rang off the wall during the second quarter of the game. Just people saying, hey, it was cool. I loved seeing it. And so that moment when it first, the premiere night, if you will, red carpet night, it was really kind of fun. And we had a big, big party that night, big bonfires. And I remember watching the Super Bowl and seeing that come on. And everybody, so that was a lot of fun. And then I think as I toured the country, I went around to advertising clubs around the country and spoke as the Frog, and it was just humbling. It was humbling to realize that and it was humbling to realize that people cared, and that something that advertising had a big, powerful impact. And so I really started, turning toward thinking about impact more than I did about sales. And so it started to change my life and probably worked toward a long circuitous route to get to the work I'm doing now. But I think I realized that in that campaign, more than any I've been a part of, the big impact that a good creative spot and a lot of money spent on air, what it could do to a society and how it could shape it. And then, like you said, to be a part of something that keeps coming back every Super Bowl is one of the top 5 spots at all time. Yep. It's just been really a humbling experience. But yeah, I'll relay this story. We got to do a spot for the Frosty Frogs. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
There was one where the frogs had their tongues stuck to a Bud can.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We had to re-record. So we had to go up there. I'll tell a funny story on Brian real quickly. We had to go up and re-record in Chicago. So we were, I think, at Cutter's again, and we went in there, and we had already gotten the takes they needed. And it's so funny. We all get, Ronnie had a capo from a guitar that he held his tongue with, and I had this little breadstick thing. We all were way overthinking the daggum thing. Could have held it with our fingers. And so we already had the takes, and Brian, remember, he was the rookie voice of and so I went over to the producer and I was like, hey, see all those row of snacks? I want you to make Brian put all that in his mouth and all these weird different combinations for the next 30 minutes and have him try different Can you do that and just spit in the trash can? Let's just mess with it. And so they did that. They already had the take.
Yeah, it was already done.
And for 30 minutes, already done. So for 30 minutes, we had Brian going on, hey, take the peanuts and the gummy bears and put them in your mouth. Oh, that's close, but that's not the texture.
Yeah, let's try something else. Yeah.
Dude, it was great. And so just stuff like that. And just people you got to meet and places you got to go and competitions against the Miller girls, like I said earlier. And it's just been a really cool calling card. And then a friend of mine went to speak at an ad class at one of the universities here in Middle Tennessee. And he was telling them, hey, one of my best buds is the voice of Bud. And they're all in college now. And they were like, what's that? Yeah. And he goes, oh, well, he's the guy that wrote the local convenience store jingle. Oh, we know that. So it gets passe after a while, Dave. So I appreciate you giving a darn about it still.
I think that's a good lesson that advertising is context above everything else, right?
Context.
There you go.
Exactly right. That's exactly right.
I said I had 2 questions for you. That was number 1. Number 2 is really more of a request for the Taplines listeners tuned in, and for me, for my own edification. Recall, or at least I do recall, earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that on the demo you did all 3 syllables. I mean, you would go on to just be Bud in the final track, but on the demo it was all 3. Would you grace us with a reprisal of how this spot came to be? Give us the Budweiser, would you, Tom?
Yeah, I'll try, and I'll try to change voices in the middle of it. It's a little difficult.
Put you on the spot.
I've done this for a while, so Dave, you caught me off guard.
Yeah, I know. Feel free. This is real. Yeah, go ahead.
Budweiser.
Yeah.
Budweiser.
Bravo. I say I give it 10 out of 10. The Taplines ad tracker rates that as the best audio we've ever had on this podcast. So I loved it. I'm sure our listeners loved it. Tom Woodard, thank you so much for joining us today and taking us down memory lane on one of the most iconic spots, one of the most iconic American beers ever produced. It's been a real treat to have you, Mr. Voice of Bud. You're welcome here anytime.
Dave, thanks very much. Have a blessed day, brother. Really appreciate the time and still giving a darn about it all.
Hell yeah. Taplines is recorded in Richmond, Virginia, and produced by yours truly and Darby Seaside, who, along with the talented Shane Farrick, composed our delightful soundtrack. Just listen to it. I also want to give a quick shout out to the entire VinePair team, and especially co-founders Adam Teeter and Josh Mallon, Editor-in-Chief Joanna Sciarrino, Managing Editor Tim McCurdy, and Art Director Danielle Grinberg, who designed our lovely Taplines logo. And of course, a big thank you to you, yes you listener, for spending time with us week in and week out. We literally couldn't do this without you. I'm Dave Infante, and I'll catch you next time.